This is one of a series of Good Answers presentations, offering evidence in reply to skeptics who challenge the Bible's accuracy. Today we examine the Bible's account of the destruction of Sodom as recorded in Genesis chapter 19. First, let's look at a portion of that account. As most of us know, the Bible tells that Lot, Abraham's nephew, had taken up residence in Sodom, and that Abraham had been warned by visiting angels that destruction was coming to that city and the others, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar, because of their gross wickedness. When the angels entered the city, Lot offered them shelter from the hostile townsfolk. Then we read, "The angels questioned Lot. 'Do you have any other relatives here in the city?' they asked. 'Get them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this city completely. The outcry against this place is so great it has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it.' Then the Lord rained down fire and burning sulfur from the sky on Sodom and Gomorrah. He utterly destroyed them, along with the other cities and villages of the plain, wiping out all the people and every bit of vegetation. Abraham got up early that morning. He looked out across the plain toward Sodom and Gomorrah and watched as columns of smoke rose from the cities like smoke from a furnace." Genesis 19:24-28. The Bible account has often been dismissed as myth, legend, or fairy tale. Here's a comment from a standard textbook. The Sodom and Gomorrah story reflects yet another motif pattern known from extra-biblical literature, that of divine beings who visit a city to test the hospitality of its people, and eventually destroy the inhospitable city. One can compare in this regard the Greek myth of Baucis and Philemon. The presence of such traditional motifs in the biblical narratives raises the possibility that at least some of these narratives are purely products of the storyteller's art. The authors make it clear that we can no more treat the Bible record of Sodom as history than we can believe the Greek myths. It's true that the story of Baucis and Philemon does involve a similar theme. It appears in Book 8 of the Metamorphoses. As Ovid tells it, Zeus, king of the gods, and Hermes, his messenger, visit the earth in disguise to investigate whether it is true that hospitality is dying out among men. They come to family after family in the city, only to be refused shelter again and again. Finally, though, at the humble cottage of Philemon, they are welcomed. As we see in this artist's rendering, the aged Philemon hurries to prepare food for the strangers, while his wife Baucis undertakes to make them comfortable. Touched by this kindness, the gods reveal to the couple that they will be spared a horrendous flood that will punish their harsh neighbors. Baucis and Philemon are to leave their cottage and climb the mountain behind it, there to wait out the deluge that is coming. The gods then transform the little cottage into a beautiful temple, where the old couple can live out their days. And when they are very old, the gods change them into an oak tree and a linden, growing side by side for all eternity. It was a popular story in antiquity, and widely believed. In fact, when Paul and Barnabas came to Lystra in southern Turkey on their first missionary journey, they were in the region where the story was well known, especially since Ovid's version of it had been published only about 40 years earlier. Paul healed a lame man near the gates of the city, and we read in Acts 14 what happened next. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates, because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifice to them. The memory of that old Greek myth was so strong there that the two preachers were hard put to convince people that they were not God's return to earth. Obviously, many people then took the tale at face value, though we call it a myth. Miller and Hayes would like us to see the tale of Sodom as a myth as well. So, myth or folktale? Or should we treat it as history? Well, if it were historical, it would involve elements like these. Cities that were so evil that only destruction would do. Fire and brimstone falling from heaven. Smoke that Abraham could see from 40 miles away. And all of that happening some 4,000 years ago. Let's see if there can be any real evidence for Sodom. First, we would need to know where to look. There has been a lot of speculation about the location of the so-called 5 cities of the plain. Here's what James Boyd remarked in the article Sodom in the Bible Dictionary. Site of the cities of the plain is not known, but variously referred to the southern end, the northern end, and the bottom of the Dead Sea. The notion that the ruins might be underwater at the south end of the Dead Sea fell apart in recent years, since that shallow part of the sea has virtually dried up, and no city remains have been found. But we still hear claims in favor of other sites. Perhaps we should begin by looking to the Bible for clues to the location. It turns out that there are several indicators. It must be in the vicinity of the Dead Sea, since Genesis 14 tells how the kings of these 5 cities fought against a raiding army in, quote, the valley of Sodom, that is, the Salt Sea, Genesis 14:3. It should also be visible from Bethel as one looks east, because we are told that when Abram and Lot were at Bethel and chose to separate, so Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. So the cities should be visible from here. And that passage contains another clue. We should be looking in the plain of the Jordan. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. The Hebrew word translated as the plain of the Jordan in most of our Bibles is Kikar. Archaeologist Stephen Collins, who has worked in this area for several years, explains. The Kikar, circular plain of the Jordan River north of the Dead Sea, is the most fertile and well-watered agricultural land in the region. So we can narrow our search area to that plain if all other clues correspond. There's another biblical clue. The cities should be on the route followed by the 4 kings, led by Chedorlaomer on that raid that the text mentions. Here are the significant points from that record. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings allied with him went out and defeated the Rephaites. Then they turned back and went to En-Mishpat, that is, Kadesh. And they conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites, as well as the Amorites who were living in Hazazon Tamar. Then came the battle with the 5 kings. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So the raiding army came around the south of the Dead Sea, defeating the Amalekites at Kadesh. Then they turned north and fought some Amorites at Hazezon Tamar. Then came the battle with the 5 kings, who probably marched out to around here to defend their cities. After defeating them, Chedorlaomer and the army pillaged the cities themselves, taking many captives, including Lot. They continued northward toward Dan, where Abram and his band caught up with them, and rescued his nephew and the other captives. And there is one last clue to the location of the cities. When God destroyed them by fire, Abram saw the smoke when he was in Hebron. Genesis 19:28. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. And sure enough, from Hebron, one can see the Kikar of the Jordan. These clues all point to the Kikar of the Jordan, the plain just north of the Dead Sea, as the place to look for Sodom. If we look there, what should we expect to find? Obviously, we'd expect some remains of the cities that had flourished from about 2500 down to around 2000 BC, the time of Abraham. And we would expect Sodom, at least, to show traces that it had been a walled city. Genesis 19:1 tells us the 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. If Sodom had a gateway, then it was fortified. But of course its walls would not have prevented its destruction when, as Genesis says, "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens." The ruins of the city would have to show that it had been utterly destroyed by fire sometime around 2000 BC. And one more thing. Scripture indicates that the Lord's judgment on the cities left them uninhabited for some time afterward, perhaps at least partly out of fear that what had happened to them had left the area cursed. We do read that some 600 years later, when the people of Israel were emerging from their desert wandering and about to enter Canaan, then they went from the wilderness to Mattanah, from Mattanah to Nahaliel, from Nahaliel to Bamoth, and from Bamoth to the valley in Moab, where the top of Pisgah overlooks the wasteland. Numbers 21:20. From Mount Pisgah, one can easily see the plain of the Jordan. And more than half a millennium after the destruction, and despite its being well-watered and fertile, the area was still a wasteland. What exactly do we find on that ancient plain? Well, archaeologists are well aware that there are remains of cities there in the Kikar. As Dr. Stephen Collins says, the Sodom narrative carefully marks out a location for the cities of the Kikar north of the Dead Sea, on the east bank of the Jordan River, where in fact the ruins of significant Bronze and Iron Age cities exist. Such a high degree of correspondence between text and ground cannot be mere coincidence. In 2006, Dr. Collins began a major project at a site called el-Hammam. Here is his team from a recent season. They chose this site because el-Hammam is the largest of the Jordan Disk sites. It is certainly one of the largest, if not the largest, Bronze Age site in Jordan. Sure enough, the ruins they began to uncover there dated from the period they were expecting. Dr. Collins again. We now have growing archaeological confirmation that el-Hammam was founded as a major urban center at least during the early Bronze Age, around 3300 BC. An abundance of pottery from the intermediate Bronze Age, 2300 to 2000 BC, suggest a continuation during that period. As season followed season, more evidence appeared. Like Sodom, the city at el-Hammam was protected by a wall and gate, a very impressive one, in fact, as this reconstruction drawing shows. Without a doubt, said Dr. Collins, it was the Middle Bronze Age fortification system, classic in all its details. Then the key element they were looking for. The city had met a fiery end sometime around 2000 BC. In Field B were the remains of a Middle Bronze Age house with a clay silo, 2 Middle Bronze Age storage jars, and a distinctive Middle Bronze Age piriform juglet, all buried under nearly 3 feet, 1 meter that is, of ash and destruction debris. The red line in this photo marks the layer of ash left by the fire. The evidence actually suggested how bad that firestorm was. This shard of pottery was actually glazed by heat that reached some 2000 degrees. But there was still one last element to the story of Sodom. It and the other cities were abandoned, and the area remained desolate for centuries afterward. And the archaeologists found that it was that way here as well. Occupation at the site came to an abrupt halt, as it did just up the road at Tal Nimrod during the Middle Bronze Age, and it remained unoccupied for several centuries after that. As I stated above, this is the occupational profile for the cities of the plain predicted from the biblical text. Stephen Collins again. But there is a loose end here. Just what is meant by the Bible account of fire and brimstone falling from the sky? Well, a recent event might help us to understand what happened there so long ago. It was on February 13th, 2013, that the residents of Chelyabinsk, Russia, were hit by a calamity. A meteor streaked down from the sky. Heated to extreme temperatures by friction with the atmosphere, it actually exploded above the city. The blast is estimated to have been equivalent to a 30-kiloton nuclear explosion, twice the power of the Hiroshima bomb. Only the fact that it exploded so high spared the city. As it was, countless windows were shattered and buildings damaged by the shock wave, but the modern structure of the buildings limited the devastation and the casualties as fire rained down from the sky. Dr. Collins believes it was a meteor that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Experts who examined those glazed pottery fragments noted that the 2000 degrees required to do that damage could not have been produced using ancient technology. The highest temperatures people could produce before the industrial age were just over half that. But a meteor strike could transform the pottery and fuse sand into glass, just as the archaeologists found. A recent History Channel program discussed this theory and included a computer simulation of the event. Here is a clip from that video.
Between 2300 and 1700 BC, an asteroid barrels down from space. It strikes the Earth's atmosphere and explodes above the ancient land of Canaan. The force is over 200 times more powerful than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. The energy from the airburst reaches the ground, creating a mushroom cloud of rock and dirt that's ejected into the atmosphere.
If it's an airburst, you're going to have possibly either many pieces of the rock raining down, and so you'd imagine that those things would cause tremendous devastation and many fires on the ground.
The citizens of Sodom take cover as fiery rock or brimstone rains down on their city.
Ancient city walls made out of mud bricks would easily have been blown flat. Straw or thatched wood construction, charred, literally brought to the point of spontaneous ignition by the heating of the event.
The shock wave from the impact would have flattened buildings. This could have led to huge destruction of these ancient, poorly built cities.
So it would be an absolutely terrifying event.
The dig at el-Hammam, now after 7 seasons, has produced just what the Bible record leads us to expect from biblical Sodom. In the right place, a walled city that was inhabited down to the time of Abraham. A city destroyed by an immense fire and abandoned for centuries thereafter. Dr. Collins asks us to ponder what these seasons of excavation have revealed. So, what happened to the cities of the eastern Jordan Disk, like Tal el-Hammam and Tal Nimrin, during the Middle Bronze Age? Why are they all unoccupied during the Late Bronze Age and the Early Iron Age, when cities flourished during those periods further north, in the Jordan Valley and on the highlands ringing the Jordan Disk? Why would the best-watered, most arable land in the region defy reoccupation for at least 5 centuries after its Middle Bronze Age destruction? Bible readers have the answers to these questions. Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, the cities of the plain, whose sins reached to heaven and brought down on them the fire of God. Many modern textbooks tell us that the Bible's account is just a folk tale, a story with a moral, but nothing more. We must ask ourselves, is it just a folk tale? Those who dug at Tal el-Hammam would not say so. What do you think? If you have questions or comments about this lecture, or any others in the Good Answers series, you may direct them to me, Dr. Jerry C. 4 at yahoo.com.